So Joker has been out for around 3 weeks now and it's doing incredibly successful, and what most people were talking about, of course, coming out of the movie, which a lot of people went into believing that it would be an origin, which was to also a lot of people's apprehension for the movie in the first place, is that even though it was to a degree, it stayed true to the mystery surrounding the Joker in many different ways that are detailed and scattered throughout the events of the film. Everyone is now talking about were the events that we saw from Arthur throughout the movie just in his head, because that very ambiguous ending scene with Arthur in what Todd Phillips is confirmed to be Arkham State Hospital, which seems to be extremely clean and very opposite to the inside of Arkham State Hospital we saw during the events of the movie when we were following the descent of Arthur into madness. So did Arthur really, when being apprehended by the GCPD, get crashed into by that ambulance and proceed to bask in the chaos and anarchy that he had created? Was Thomas Wayne really not Arthur Fleck's father, which you may assume to be the case, but whether you caught it or not, there were still hints of this being true, even after the explanation scene of Arthur's mother, Penny, being written off as delusional and there being no merit to her claim that Thomas Wayne is the father of Arthur Fleck, but we'll get to that a little bit later. So in this video, I'm going to be exploring the most compelling questions that Joker raises about the reality of what we see in the movie that you probably found yourself asking about when you came out of the film. And I'm going to try my best to analyze them and just ultimately give my take on what I think could be the reality of Arthur, because even though Todd Phillips has said that he would ultimately reveal the pressing answers that come out after seeing this movie, it won't be for a very long time. So let's start with the biggest one. Was Arthur imagining this all, as in the events of the entire movie? We first start asking this question, or at least I did, after when we see Arthur speaking to his therapist, Deborah Kane, when she asked him about why he spent time previously being committed. Now, this is when we get a very quick flash to Arthur in a white room, in the straitjacket, banging his head against the door. It then cuts back to seemingly present day Arthur, who replies saying, "Who knows?" And then that's just left at that until we see Arthur in the exact same white styled facility at the very end of the movie, which we now know for sure to be Arkham State Hospital thanks to Todd Phillips talking about this scene and how that laugh we see Arthur do at the very end of the movie, we actually get to see him genuinely laugh for the first time. Well, first of all, I personally don't think that everything in the movie up until that scene at the end is completely in the imagination of Arthur Fleck. Now, that doesn't mean, however, that parts of the movie weren't true. For example, how it was very obviously shown how Arthur had delusions about being with Sophie Moore, with the movie showing us scenes like Arthur Fleck walking into her apartment and her being scared for that of the safety of her life as well as her child's. So for me, to say that the whole events of the movie is just one big delusion of this man at the end of the film who is sat in Arkham State Hospital, just, as I said, in my opinion, is highly likely not the case. Plus, this would mean that if absolutely everything was a delusion, then Arthur would be having a delusion within that delusion being Sophie Moore, if that makes sense. And while some could argue that is still possible, that Arthur is having delusions with his delusion of the movie, that is very far-reaching to me, and as a result, I'm just kind of ruling it out in general. However, there are also signs that make the argument of the whole thing being inside Joker's head compelling too. Not that I ultimately believe this, but there is evidence to suggest otherwise that recently Todd Phillips addressed, but I think you guys will be interested in it if you haven't heard it already. During the events of the movie, there are certain clues which I couldn't really think of as being indicators for anything else at the time, which did concern me. Now, we've already discussed how when Arthur first saw Deborah Kane right at the beginning of the movie, there was that quick flashback to his time in that room, with him banging his head against the door when asked about being previously institutionalized. Now, not only is this scene just interesting within itself, because it mirrors the same Arthur Fleck we get right at the end, but there was also another clue in this scene that ties to another couple of clues throughout the film, in that when Arthur is hitting his head against the door to his cell, there is a clock in the corner that displays the time 11 minutes past 11. Now, as I mentioned, this time being 11 11:11 occurs at another time I know of throughout the movie, now the first being the one we just said, but the second being when Arthur is punching out the clock in the Ha-Ha's booking agency. Now if you ask me, I would usually always say that things like this are never a mistake in the movie, especially when you're including a quick flashback to Arthur being institutionalized in the first few scenes of the film, and that's one of the biggest questions coming out of the movie as to whether that's linked with the ending scene. However, Todd Phillips was recently asked about this whole 11:11 connection, and he says it's a coincidence. Now, I actually believe him here because I think he would have given kudos to the audience if they really did pick up on something worth reading into at this point. But to be honest, personally, I'm pretty glad that these factors in the movie don't hold any significance and are apparently just coincidences, because Arthur having that same time in his cell and then with the scene of it popping up back in his therapy room, it really spelled out to me that this was all happening at the same time because it was in his head, which is not the way I personally like to view the entirety of events that happened in Arthur's life in the movie that is Joker. So ultimately here, as far as the whole it was in Arthur's head while he was in Arkham State Hospital theory goes, I don't believe it, not one bit. The way I feel that the film genuinely conducts those last moments in the movie is that Arthur, and the way that this was written, which holds true to the Joker's whole I remember it one way, sometimes another, mysterious origin so to speak, is that perhaps this therapist at the ending scene is asking Arthur about the reasonings behind why he is there, or the events of what led him to get there, generic therapy, I mean you name it, but it's along those lines, and the whole movie is a narration from that of the Joker in this room perhaps, and of course he is supposed to be this unreliable narrator for the events that we see happen throughout the movie. So as a result of this, throughout the movie we are shown of course like various true events of what happened to him, but also with the inclusion of stuff that he would like to think of as what happened, but in all reality didn't. I mean, the easiest example of this is the one that they spelled out to viewers with Sophie Moore, and I think that this is a great way to approach viewing the film, and to be honest, I do think that it is the definitive intended way the movie was created, because now we as viewers are wondering what is real when the Joker is telling his story, and what does the Joker like to remember, or more accurately should I say, wished it had have gone a certain way in certain scenes. And what I mean by that is that there's actually various factors in the film that support this whole multiple choice element to the movie, or should I say the way Arthur happens to be telling this version that we saw, such as for example when Arthur's mother died. So I personally think that it's possible that Arthur, the way we saw it when he killed his mother himself, didn't actually happen specifically like this, because this is the way he would have actually have liked things to have gone down instead. Now, a lot of people going out of the movie mentioned that Penny Fleck didn't exactly have a flatline noise when Arthur suffocated her, which is fair enough and odd. There was no noise like that. So when I started thinking about all of this, it did occur to me that despite the film showing Arthur loving his mother earlier on, things did take a dramatic shift when he found out about her at the time, hiding his Wayne heritage from him, but more noticeably when he stole the patient records for his mother, who had previously spent time at Arkham State Hospital. That explained how she just stood there and just let all of this abuse Arthur went through at the hands of Penny's boyfriends go down. Regardless though, in the movie, with the way it depicts these chain of events, it's fairly obvious that Arthur, after learning all of what he did from those records, killed his mother because of that. But here's the catch, I don't necessarily think that he did. And this is the movie's way again, just like Sophie Moore, but in a more subtle way of telling you that through the no flatline noise, and the true part being what he learned about his abuse and what story he's telling in this white room at the end of the film, left him feeling that he wished he did. And this is the way he imagined it going down in this version of the story. Another example of this is in that very ending scene we see when Arthur is standing on top of the GCPD car, soaking in all of that attention from the crowd. Now, as much as I want this scene to be real and how I know many choose it to be so, I don't necessarily think think that this was real either. I think that a large majority of the events in the film did happen, as I've already stated up until now, and it caused Arthur to do things such as the Murray Franklin talk show. However, I do think that that last point in the film, it was quite likely that Arthur was indeed apprehended and taken to Arkham State Hospital up until the very point of that ending scene that we see, which sparks all of this conversation in the first place, where he kills that therapist and runs away from the hospital staff. So in my mind with this, once again, the Joker probably likes to retell this part of the story, that he was adored by the people of Gotham here and looked up to as a hero of his own story, as he relishes in front of the reaction of the crowd and how he paints this smile on his face. I mean, of course, you could argue that it's real and that somehow between all of these people he got apprehended at some point by the GCPD and then proceeded to end up at Arkham State Hospital in that final scene, but I just find it quite unlikely. And with the Joker being an unreliable narrator anyway, of course he would like to paint himself in a picture like that, just as it was put in that second to last scene, with people noticing that he exists as he holds his arms out in that beholding pose. And then lastly for this video anyway guys, is the Wayne family connection that still, believe it or not, makes my mind wonder and wonder and wonder. So at first glance, sure, you might be thinking, oh come on, like the film perfectly spelled it out that Penny Fleck had a narcissistic disorder and was delusional. We saw those adoption papers and all of that, which as a result, including myself in the film, made people kind of think, oh, okay, I see. It turns out that Penny really was, when working for Thomas Wayne, obsessed with her former employer, and you just kind of write it off. However, not everyone has caught this in the film. I mean, by now, maybe you have. But after Arthur learns about his mother's mental history and reads of his childhood abuse, towards the end of the film, as he has more or less transitioned into his Joker persona, he is looking at a picture of his mother in her youth. And on the back is a handwritten note. It talks about how this person loves her beautiful smile, and guess who it's signed by? T.W., none other than Thomas Wayne. Now at this point in the movie, Arthur just crumbles this photo and throws it away, and it's not really thought of again, but it's another seed of doubt in that story of how Penny Fleck was made out to be, completely making it up, and I just find this fascinating. Now let me get this clear, I'm not definitely saying that this is true, but Thomas Wayne for sure is likely powerful enough, especially in this Elseworlds depiction of him being a lot more unlike the Thomas Wayne that we're usually familiar with, who is kind of a kind-hearted man, whereas this version is depicted to be a lot more of a, well, you guys get what I mean there. To forge all of these documents, which as Penny said herself in the flashback scenes to when that detective was interviewing her, mentioning how her child was tied to a radiator, if you remember, but she said how Thomas was just making all of this up so it just wouldn't seem that way. And of course, with her potential legitimate health, and I say it like that because you could also argue that Thomas Wayne could have forged the mental health documents as well, but legitimate or not, it just made it look even more believable for Thomas Wayne to paint this picture, and as a result completely covered it up as a very young man in his 20s that due to the Wayne's stature, amongst other things, he had no involvement with Penny Fleck. However guys, as you're probably gathering through the note that Arthur was looking at of his mother in her youth, it definitely implies a bit of flirtatious behavior of around 30 years ago between Thomas Wayne and Penny Fleck that you totally cannot rule out that something may have indeed happened between them both, as we know she worked for him once upon a time. At the same time as well, I'm not saying that I'm the biggest endorser of this idea that the Joker is indeed the brother of Bruce Wayne. I mean, even though I do have to admit it does add a poetic element to them being two sides of the same coin, but it is a very fascinating theory to consider regardless, as no matter what, they did dangle it in front of your face once again to plant that seed of how this could very much so still be true even after making most people completely write it off after that flashback scene of Penny in that institution with all of these documents being, presented that she was mentally ill, amongst other things. Now there's a bunch bunch of other little theories that I want to go on and talk about, but I've already been talking way too long enough in this video as it is about the reality side of things, and these particular theories that I've mentioned being the main standout ones. But one thing I will say to end this video off is that I definitely don't believe that this Joker is an inspiration to the Joker that will face off against Batman one day. Now, despite people going on about this age difference between Bruce Wayne and Arthur Fleck, or just, the Joker, you could say, despite Joaquin's real life age of 44, that he was meant to be around 35 in the film, as in the film itself, they did mention how he was a very little boy around 30 years ago. So add 15 years onto that, which makes him around 50, which is also around Jack Nicholson's Joker age, which also arguably in turn makes Bruce around his mid-20s, and a fairly early Batman at that, which you could definitely push it back even further. So arguably here, guys, is what I'm trying to say is that Arthur Fleck, despite all the age stuff that people keep talking about, could still easily be the Joker in this universe, just not potentially one that people like the age difference of. But then again, I'll say it again, that people loved Nicholson's Joker, and he was quite a lot older, being around 50 as I mentioned. But bottom line here, this film isn't really trying to edge into any of that anyway, just in terms of the Batman stuff that is. In my personal opinion, to think of anyone else other than Arthur Fleck to be the clown prince of crime in this Elseworlds iteration just actually soils on what this movie went about creating with the character. I mean, I love the pathological aspect to this character, the elements of mystery that still surround him due to the unreliable narrator aspect of this film, which in turn reflects the aspect of the Joker that people are so enticed by. This is truly a guy I can see being that character. Now, for another person, or rioter if you will, out there inspired by Fleck's actions that just ripple throughout Gotham City, to more or less have the exact same characteristics of that of the Joker and what Arthur displays in this film just kind of lessens it for me, despite what I get people see the attraction is of this whole idea, in how that the Joker can beat anyone, perhaps after just one bad day, so to speak. And in a similar way to that the Gotham show approached this, is that he's just more than a man, he's an idea and a philosophy that will live on through the shadows of Gotham's discontent, and that society can always arguably create more victims, if you will, like Arthur Fleck, that Batman will never quite be able to get rid of. But no. Arthur Fleck's the Joker for me. But aside from that, everyone, I'm sorry that this was such a long video. I just kind of wanted to go into detail about these various theories that are kind of the most prominent ones, I would say. But I would love to hear all of your thoughts down in the comments below. What are your thoughts on my thoughts? What are your thoughts that I didn't even mention on theories in the video? Let me know if you felt like I missed anything integral out about the Joker movie. But like this video if you did enjoy it, everyone. Subscribe for more videos like this. Just thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you Jokers in the next video. Goodbye.